Thank you for coming back for part 2 of Famous Moments, Famous Movies. On Tuesday, we did the first half, of course. Today is the second half. Today, our themes are Oh, the Humanity, as you can see right there, great actors, great writing, and unhappy endings. Unhappy endings today. 5 more clips for you today. And of course, behind the scenes on all the clips I'm going to share with you. A reminder that if you'd like to chat with me during the clips or ask me questions during the clips, by all means, go ahead and send a chat to me if you can, if you know how to do so. By all means, go ahead and do so, and I'm happy to try to interact with you that way through the chat, as well as, of course, we'll have time in the end for questions. So here we go. Oh, the Humanity. Now remember, this showcases mankind at its not so best. And when I came up with the idea for this theme, I immediately, my mind just immediately went to Taxi Driver, Martin Scorsese's film Taxi Driver, that starred Robert De Niro as an unhinged Vietnam veteran who is isolated from a society that he finds deplorable, and he fantasizes about gun violence. And in this scene that you're about to watch, practices pulling his gun on people who are confronting him. This is the famous "You Talking to Me" scene from Taxi Driver. Enjoy. So Mean Streets, 3 years earlier, was Martin Scorsese's first film with Robert De Niro. And that's really the film that put De Niro on the map and made him an in-demand star. But it was Taxi Driver, along with The Godfather Part 2, which he won an Oscar for 2 years earlier, that really elevated De Niro to A-list status. Surprisingly, for as much credit as screenwriter Paul Schrader gets for the script for Taxi Driver, its most famous line in its most famous scene, which you just watched, was completely improvised by Robert De Niro. The screenplay only said, "Travis looks in the mirror," and that was it. Martin Scorsese, our director, said that he got the inspiration for the scene from a Marlon Brando scene in a film that Brando made called Reflections in a Golden Eye, which I have not seen. Now, De Niro was oddly and uniquely prepared to do this improvisation at the request of Martin Scorsese, because De Niro studied under an acting coach named Stella Adler. And one of the exercises Stella Adler has her students do is practice different interpretations of a phrase that would otherwise be innocuous. So you take this simple, common, easy phrase, like, "Are you talking to me?" and you try to give it different meaning, different connotations, depending on how you say it. When Stella Adler saw this scene in Taxi Driver, her thought was, "Oh my goodness, there's one of my students performing one of the exercises that I taught him many years ago." Of course, she never thought she would see it in quite this way. Now, the character of Travis Bickle that Robert De Niro plays has become famous for a lot of dubious reasons. The biggest, the most impactful could be assassin John Hinckley. The name may sound familiar to you. John Hinckley attempted to assassinate President Reagan in March of 1981, and he said that Travis Bickle, De Niro's character, was his inspiration in attempting to do so. Coincidentally and ironically, the assassination attempt on Reagan led to the Academy Awards being delayed one evening in March of 1981, which means Robert De Niro had to wait an extra day to win his Best Actor Oscar for Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull, which was a terrific film released in 1980. Oliver Stone, the writer and director Oliver Stone, said that he believes that he was the inspiration for Travis Bickle. And I don't know why you would try to make this claim or try to brag about this. But Stone says that because he was a student of Martin Scorsese at the NYU Film School in the early 70s when the script was being developed, and he was a Vietnam veteran. Remember, Stone's experiences in Vietnam were chronicled in Platoon through the Charlie Sheen character. And he drove a cab and wore a drab olive green jacket the way De Niro does. He feels like he gave Scorsese the idea for the character. Again, it's an odd thing to brag about, but Oliver Stone being Oliver Stone. Finally, the last thing he says is very indicative here, the last thing Travis says, and that's, well, I'm the only one here. You know, we always quote and think about, you talking to me, but we don't give the due credence to, well, I'm the only one here, because that line, well, I'm the only one here, really nicely sums up Travis's desperate attempt to connect to society, to make some kind of social contact, which he is inept at and therefore unable to do. I mean, he fails at every turn. Chatter in the cab, he asks a girl out on a date and he takes her to a porno. He wants to befriend a child prostitute who was played by Jodie Foster. He scares her away. His loneliness becomes frightening for us. The more he tries to connect, the more he fails, the more isolated he feels, and then the more desperate he becomes for attention. It's a slow movie, but really quite something at the same time. Our next clip. In Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick's brilliant film, Dr. Strangelove, I guess there's no better way to have a commentary on humanity than by destroying all of humanity, essentially. So toward the end of the film, after their superiors believe there has been a nuclear attack, bombardiers are told to drop a bomb on Russia. This is the end of Dr. Strangelove. This is Slim Pickens and as Major Kong, and a great, great final moment. Not the last scene, so it doesn't qualify for happy endings, but a final reckoning, if you will, for humanity toward the end of Dr. Strangelove. Enjoy. The end of the world as we know it. Does anyone recognize this young man right here that you're seeing on screen? If you do, go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us who you think that might be. I am very confident you know that actor. Does anyone recognize him? That is a very young...
Denzel Washington?
No, good guess. Good guess. But that is a very young James Earl Jones. Look at the face. You should be able to recognize him through the face now that I mentioned the name. It was a very small role for James Earl Jones, but it was a great boost for his career. He played Lieutenant Lothar Zog in the film. Again, just a couple scenes. The cowboy riding the bomb was Slim Pickens. Now, the role is Major Kong. The name of the character is Major Kong. And that was actually supposed to be Peter Sellers' role. Peter Sellers played 3 roles in Dr. Strangelove, and he earned a Best Actor Oscar nomination for it. He was supposed to play a 4th. This was going to be at the end of production. He was supposed to play a 4th, and that would have been Major Kong. But Peter Sellers said that I cannot get the American cowboy accent down. I cannot do it correctly. If you think of Peter Sellers, you think he was great at accents, all sorts of accents. So a bit of a surprise that he struggled with the American cowboy accent. So this puts Stanley Kubrick in a bind. He needs someone for this role. So he finds Slim Pickens, who at that point was a character actor in Westerns, and doesn't tell Slim Pickens that the film is actually a satire. It's a comedy. So Pickens played his role straight. And Kubrick knew that just with the tone of Pickens' voice and his delivery, that Pickens playing the role straight would provide the perfect amount of levity that he wanted in the movie. Now, these were the last scenes to be shot, both because of the schedule and out of necessity. Slim Pickens, when he was cast in the film, had never been out of the United States and had to wait to get a passport to fly to London in order to shoot his scenes for the film. The role was great for Pickens. It took him out of the supporting roles that he had always played and gave him much better roles throughout his career, loosely based on a Boeing pilot named Alvin Tex Johnston. The target in Russia that they are dropping the bomb on is called Laputa. The name comes from a Jonathan Swift novel called Gulliver's Travels, which in itself was a political satire. Dr. Strangelove earned 4 Oscar nominations in 1964, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Peter Sellers, Best Director for Stanley Kubrick. Didn't win any. That is the year, you'll recall, of My Fair Lady winning 8 Oscars, 1964. If you're familiar with film critic Gene Siskel always said that Dr. Strangelove was his favorite movie of all time. Great actors, great writing. I only have one clip for you with great actors, great writing. Of course, there could be many more, but I think it's a really terrific clip. It's from A Few Good Men, the 1992 film with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise. It's the famous "You Can't Handle the Truth" scene. What's happening here, just for your context, a Marine in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, has died of hazing. And there are 2 young Marines who are on trial for murder. The young Marines' lawyers are Tom Cruise and Demi Moore and Kevin Pollak. They believe there's much more to the story, and they believe that the Marine died as a result of hazing. And in this scene, Colonel Jessup, who is the man in control at Guantanamo Bay, he's played by Jack Nicholson. Colonel Jessup is asked, did you order the code red? And the code red would have been the order to some of his soldiers to discipline the Marine who died in the hazing incident. So if Jessup ordered the code red hazing that led to the death of a Marine, that's of course very bad for Colonel Jessup, Nicholson's character. So terrific acting here. Enjoy Cruise and Nicholson. The intensity ratchets up throughout the scene, and it's really, really great stuff. Enjoy. It's great stuff. It's so intense. It's so well written and so well acted by Cruise and Nicholson there. The inspiration for A Few Good Men, as written by Aaron Sorkin, came from Aaron Sorkin's sister. Now, this was originally a play. Sorkin originally wrote it as a play, and then it became a movie. Aaron Sorkin's sister was a military lawyer at Guantanamo Bay who really did have to defend Marines in a case of hazing. Sorkin's sister told him about the situation. He then took it to the next level by saying there was a murder and just kind of explored the story from there. But yeah, the actual inspiration for the story comes from Aaron Sorkin's sister, who was a real lawyer at Guantanamo Bay. Now, the film was directed by Rob Reiner, and according to Reiner, Jack Nicholson was giving it his all during every single take that he was reading this. So ordinarily, if a director is getting the other actors first, so Reiner wanted to get the reaction shots of Cruise, Demi Moore, Kevin Bacon, Kevin Pollak, etc. So Reiner is shooting the reaction shots first and asking Nicholson to read his lines so they can react appropriately. But ordinarily, an actor might just kind of take a step back and tone it down a bit in order to be ready for when the camera is actually on him. Reiner saw that Nicholson was giving it his full go every single time. Reiner goes over to Nicholson and says, hey, Jack, save some for when the camera's on you and we're doing this for real. Nicholson said, Rob, it's not very often you get some great dialogue like this. I love doing it and I'm good. Don't worry about me. Nicholson, of course, was correct. He is terrific in the film. He conceded that he was quite spent by the end of the day that they were shooting, but really the results are outstanding. Nicholson did receive a supporting actor Oscar nomination for his work, and that work, one final cherry on top here, that work took 10 days. Nicholson's entire role in the film took 10 days to film, and he earned $5 million for his work. $5 million over the course of 10 days. Not shabby at all. Okay, now we move into unhappy endings. And remember, if you have the chat feature on, if you have any questions for me at any time, go ahead and shoot me a question through the chat. With unhappy endings, I wanted to take a look at, we're used to seeing happy endings, so I wanted to see movies that don't necessarily end happily. How do they do it? Why do they do it? And what does it all mean? So the first example I have for you is the ending of The Graduate, 1967, Dustin Hoffman, directed by Mike Nichols. Now, many people, I think, misconstrue the ending of The Graduate as a happy ending. And I argue that it's not really all that much of a happy ending for reasons that I will explain after you watch it. The context here that you need to know is that Ben, Dustin Hoffman's character, has slept with Mrs. Robinson, Anne Bancroft, and is now in love with Mrs. Robinson's daughter, Elaine, who's wonderfully played by Catherine Ross. Now, the problem is that Elaine is about to get married to someone else. Elaine is literally in the church at the altar, ready to get married to someone else who her parents believe is the right person for her. Ben is struggling to get to the church on time to stop her from making this horrible decision because he loves her so very much. Here is the ending of The Graduate. So on one hand, sure, you can argue that Ben saves Elaine from a life of relative boredom, essentially the life that her parents led, and because he rescues her from that, there is an element of happiness in the ending. I do concede that point. However, you also see the two of them on the bus, and as they stop laughing, you get that look on their face of, what happens now? What do we do now? You were stooping my mother for who knows how long, and where do we go now? What do we do next? It's an odd thing. So a little more to backtrack. Hoffman rehearsed the scene in which he is knocking on the glass, the scene that you're looking at here, but he was pounding on it so heavily that the priest in the church where they were shooting said, "You're going to break it, get out, or stop pounding on it so heavily." So I think Hoffman started pounding a little lighter, and then you can add the sound effects later in post-production. Mike Nichols was the director of the film. A year earlier, Mike Nichols made Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. This is very early in Mike Nichols' career. Of the 7 Oscar nominations The Graduate received, Mike Nichols was the only one to win. He won Best Director in 1967. Dustin Hoffman was nominated for Best Actor. He did not win in 1967. He was only paid $17,000 for his work on the film, Dustin Hoffman. Remember, this is very early in Hoffman's career. He was not yet the star that he would grow to become in the next 20 years. So Hoffman made $17,000 for the film. He said that after taxes and living expenses, he had only about $4,000 left to live on. And he collected unemployment until he landed his next major feature role, which was as Ratso Rizzo in Midnight Cowboy. So imagine that. You are the young, hot star of a breakout hit movie. You are an Oscar nominee, and you are still collecting unemployment until you get your next really substantial role in Midnight Cowboy. Ironically, Mike Nichols told Dustin Hoffman not to take the role of Ratso Rizzo in Midnight Cowboy because the role is so different from Benjamin in The Graduate. Nichols was concerned that the role would hurt Hoffman's career and image. Thankfully, it did not. Now, regarding that famous kind of sobering emotion that comes over Ben and Elaine in the back of the bus, Nichols said that he had told Captain Ross and Dustin Hoffman to laugh. When they get to the back of the bus, just start laughing and be exuberant that you pulled this off, start laughing. And he had the camera on them as they were laughing. And then, once you go through the cycle of fake laughing, you start to think, well, okay, what now? Well, Mike Nichols didn't yell cut. And the reason that Hoffman and Catherine Ross are not looking at the camera, Mike Nichols said, was because they were too afraid of him yelling at them again to start laughing again. So it's like you have this fake laughter. The fake laughter kind of subsides because you think, surely we have what we need. And then you have these evasive eyes from the camera because you don't want to look at the director who's going to give you a look of disapproval. That's how you get this kind of famous, very sobering ending to the movie. Not something that was intended, but when Mike Nichols saw it, he realized, oh, wow, that's actually perfect. That really fits. And let's keep that in. So it's an odd question. Like, do Ben and Elaine actually even love each other? Debatably, yes. I mean, this is very much in tune with the zeitgeist of the late 60s. This is their way of bucking the establishment and being able to go and do their own thing. It's an odd indication of a lack of joy and lack of happiness, though, with the use of the song, The Sound of Silence. Think about it. If you're watching a movie in which a romantic comedy, for example, 2 people are finally together and they're going to live happily ever after, the song would be upbeat and positive and about the benefits and virtues of love. Using a song like The Sound of Silence is almost the exact opposite of that. It doesn't at all echo the exuberance of their love. And in fact, it's kind of downtrodden and a bit of a sad song. So a fascinating sequence that many misinterpret as, hey, they're running off together, they're in love, that's great, when in fact there's much more to it and it's not nearly as happy as it may appear to be. Mike sent me a chat, thank you, Mike, That also added The War of the Roses, the Kathleen Turner, Michael Douglas movie from, I think it was 1989, maybe 1990. The War of the Roses also having an unhappy ending that could otherwise be perceived as a happy ending. In the end, as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael Douglas's character goes back home and tries to kind of work things out with the family. Truth was, it was an absolute disaster with the family, and that's why they're going through the divorce in the first place. So to go back home, yes, you have this kind of ideal of reconciliation, but I don't think that was really in the works. So a good example there, Mike. Thank you for sending me that through the chat. The last clip I have for you, as I promised you on Tuesday, is the ending of Sunset Boulevard, which when you combine this with All About Eve, the clip I shared with you from All About Eve, you have another aging starlet who is desiring her former and truly now lost glory. That starlet is Norma Desmond. She was a silent film star. She is played by Gloria Swanson, who herself was a silent film star. Wonderfully written by Billy Wilder. In this scene, Norma Desmond thinks that her old director, Cecil B. DeMille, has come to her home to make a movie, Salome, that will rejuvenate her career. She is delusional. She has lost her mind. And this is a wonderfully played moment by Gloria Swanson. Enjoy the ending of Sunset Boulevard. So Gloria Swanson, by the late 40s when they were casting the film, was of course no longer a household name, but Billy Wilder knew that he wanted a silent screen star to play the role. He approached Mary Pickford among a handful of other silent screen starlets before he cast Gloria Swanson, who had a good amount of fame and notoriety in the 1920s herself. Swanson said that she played the final descent on the staircase, and therefore the final descent into madness. Some of you may have seen this in the chat that I sent you. She played it barefoot. The reason she did this was not because it was something that was in character that Norma would have done, which arguably, sure, it's something Norma would have done, but because there were a lot of wires on the stairs, and she didn't feel comfortable wearing heels or any other kind of shoes. She wanted to be able to feel where the wires were to make sure she didn't trip down the stairs. So if you look back at the clip, you can see as she's walking down the stairs, she is actually barefoot. When Swanson was finished shooting this scene, which actually wasn't the final scene that was shot, this was more toward the middle of production when they shot the scene, Swanson said that she burst into tears. She was so emotional after she finished shooting the scene, and the cast and the crew, they all applauded her for how good she is in this scene. And again, even though it wasn't the last scene filmed, Billy Wilder threw a party for her as soon as this shot was finished. He too was so moved by her performance in this scene. She, to her credit, was a Best Actress nominee along with Bette Davis in 1950. Neither of them would win that year. It is one of the greatest closing lines of all time in any movie, right up there with Nobody's Perfect from Some Like It Hot, one of Billy Wilder's other great movies. Unlike the character that she played, Gloria Swanson had essentially accepted the fact that movies didn't really want her anymore. By this point in her career, she had moved to New York. She was working in radio. Eventually, she would start working in television, and she would be pretty happy with where her career was. This doesn't really lead to a great resurgence in interest in Gloria Swanson on the big screen. On a final note, Billy Wilder, over the years, the movie was released in 1950, Billy Wilder would grow frustrated with people believing that the ending was ambiguous and wanting to know what happens to Norma next. What is the next step for Norma Desmond? And Billy Wilder got frustrated because he didn't really have an answer. So he said, and I quote, "I have no idea. All I know is that she's Meshuggah. That's it. That's the end." So there you have it. What happens next with Norma? I mean, I think it's pretty clear to me that Norma will go into an asylum of some kind. She will get treatment and likely not be released anytime soon. The question was asked through the chat, was that Cecil B. DeMille himself who was playing the director there? No, it was not. That was you were looking at Erich von Stroheim, who himself was a director in the 1920s and 30s, but not Mr. DeMille there. You were not looking at Cecil B. DeMille. I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Go ahead and unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask me any other questions you may have. Before we finish, this is Peter and Ellie. You'll remember them from It Happened One Night. When I do this presentation live and in person, I always say, if anybody's driving, Peter and Ellie still need a ride. I find that to be cute and amusing. On Tuesday, I'm back with you with Hall of Fame actors. Not Hall of Fame actors, Hall of Fame directors, showcasing the 8 greatest directors of all time. That's next week, Tuesday and Thursday. Okay, please, ready for question. Jane, you look like you have something?
No, I just unmuted myself. I was just going to say thank you. This is so interesting. Every one of them, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane.